Welcome back to this expert panel number 2, efficient and agile management for resilient cities and within budget. And allow me to highlight the within budget aspect, given that real difficulty is often sticking to budgetary restrictions. As countries around the world set goals to become climate neutral in the coming years, cities are already getting down to work. The roadmap towards more resilient cities and greenhouse gas neutrality is underway, but it implies many cross-sector approaches: citywide energy and water efficiency, territorial strategic plans, district-focused circularity, the role of culture and communities in achieving this goal, etc., etc., etc. Who better to talk to us about this topic than those that I have the pleasure to introduce on our second panel of experts, with Kate Armstrong, Design and Communications Lead at FabLab Barcelona. Hello, Kate.
Hello, Jamie.
And also connected via Zoom, we have Robert Compton, Project Manager at Germany Trade and Invest. Hello, Robert.
Hi there. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. Before we get underway, I would like to remind you all of the alternatives available to our audience to allow you to get involved with us here today. Underneath your screen, you will see that there's a space for polls and a Q&A to submit your questions to the speakers, and you can also interact with your colleagues by using the chat. To begin with, permit me ask to our amazing audience a quick question to get the poll up and running. The question is, should more autonomy be given to local authorities when implementing policies to reduce emissions? Option A, no. It is important for national and local agendas to be aligned, even if this limits self-government. Option B, yes. Local governments should be less legally constricted. Okay, now I would like to ask our experts a quick question, and we would like you to respond with a short sentence. If you could give some brief advice to local governments wanting to collaborate with civil society and the private sector to become climate neutral, what would it be? Ms. Armstrong, let's start with you.
Jamie, this is something that we work on a lot with FabLab Barcelona, and for us, it's all about bottom-up, top-down collaboration at all levels through co-design and through participating in the city in prototypes.
Mr. Compton?
I completely agree with what Kate had to say there. And I think making climate neutrality the obvious and attractive option for citizens is the way forward. So don't say we're banning cars from town, say we're creating a family-friendly town, and then offer an intermodal mobility service that's better and cheaper than owning and servicing a car. So things in that sort of direction.
Great, so you're on the same page. Before we move on to our experts' presentations, I would firstly like to share the results of our first poll with you. And as you see, option A is the most voted. Local governments should deal with this. So let's move on. Thank you very much for your participation. We encourage you to share your opinions in the chat and to like your favorite questions at the Q&A section. Remember that the more likes a question receives, the greater the chance is that it will be put to the panel. Now let's continue with Miss Kate Armstrong, who's going to talk about the new Centrino project. So good afternoon, wonderful to have you here. What is this Centrino project about?
Well, Jamie, I work in FabLab Barcelona, which is based at the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia, just down here in Poblenou. And we've been working for around 10 years on trying to understand how we can bring citizens through technology and open design closer to making decisions and understanding the future of their cities. So the Centrino project is one of our many projects that we run in this vein, and it is specifically looking at historic industrial areas inside cities and understanding them as vehicles to really drive transformation through all sorts of different areas, including creative economy and sustainable innovation. So the project itself is a Horizon 2020 funded project, and it's led by the Comune di Milano, and we are the scientific coordinators at FabLab Barcelona. And the project is really looking at how can we develop tools, approaches, and methodologies to work with citizens in the city on these historic industrial sites, which are in transition. So the way that we do this is through a bottom-up, top-down approach, and one that really brings together different ways of looking at materiality and resources in a city. So this is not just about the actual resource capacity a city has, but also about the social and cultural value that is inside the city. So we do this through bringing together different kinds of approaches. One is the FabCity Global approach, which is one that looks at moving bits, not atoms. So looking at how we can redesign the paradigm of production and consumption in cities. Another is emotion networking. Another one is looking at life cycle analysis in cities and also material flow analyses that are situated and specific to the regions we work with. So the project itself actually works with 9 pilot cities across Europe. And what's really great is that each city has a different focus. And it's really about, those focuses are really about staying true to the ecological challenges of our time and understanding through a co-design process in the city what matters in terms of not just, as I said, the material aspect of a city, but also the social and cultural aspects. The project also puts a very large emphasis on the cultural and creative industries. This is important because it really looks at these historic areas as ways of bringing this past in the cities into the future. And we do this through the engagement of makerspaces, fab labs, food labs, and spaces in which this kind of creativity is abundant and can really drive citizen participation. So one of the biggest aspects that we hope to kind of bring out of this project is collaboration between the cities and also collaboration at the city level, really prototyping with citizens and understanding the needs directly in the city.
That's interesting. We've heard throughout this Tomorrow.City that a local approach is needed, obviously, because different cities work in a different way. Thank you very much for sharing this with us, Ms. Armstrong. And you've shown us this fascinating project, that's obvious, in order to explain how Centrino works in pilots, covering a broad geographic area and cultural realities across 9 cities of 4 different sizes. We will also be following with you, but please, I want to move now to Mr. Robert Compton. We understand that Germany Trade and Investment has no shortage of solutions for the promotion of renewable energies with the forms. Is it feasible to bear the costs of decarbonization? Mr. Compton, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. I'll answer the question from my perspective. I work for Germany Trade and Invest. We're a government agency that supports foreign businesses that are expanding to the German market with their own subsidiary. We accompany projects for free with our industry expertise, our networks with site selection, information on incorporation and funding and so on. So we're very close to where the growth, opportunities and changes happening on the ground in the German market. And one area that we're focusing on as an agency is digitization, digital infrastructure and smart cities in particular. German cities are keener than ever to get smart, especially in the wake of the coronavirus. And this digitization drive is creating real market entry opportunities for international businesses. So here are 5 big reasons why Germany is interesting for businesses with smart city solutions. I think firstly, size is less important than drive. 5 of Europe's top 15 cities in terms of GDP are in Germany. However, the smartness of German cities is regularly ranked by Bitkom. Although Hamburg, Munich and Cologne are at the top of that list, smaller cities such as Osnabrück, for example, are also very prominent in the list. And that's important because Germany actually has 81 cities with more than 100,000 residents. Secondly, in many respects, German cities are free to create their own regulations and run their local administrations as they see fit, which actually fits quite nicely with the opening poll. This autonomy that the cities have in Germany provides an opportunity for unique public-private smart city partnerships, and that's a freedom that's not always there in other countries. Thirdly, German cities are actively looking for tech solutions. A recent survey found that 74% of municipal leaders in Germany believe collaboration with outside entities and international partners is essential to smartening their cities up. And fourthly, The national government offers major funding for smart city initiatives in Germany. The Interior Ministry has pledged nearly €1 billion for smart city pilot projects that can be emulated later across the country. And fifthly, the coronavirus pandemic is accelerating digitization in Germany. The recent Online Access Act requires all 11,000 local governments to make their public administrative services accessible online by the end of next year. So while the agency I work for has specialists for smart city solutions, mobility, and all other industries, I'm on the energy, building, and environmental technology team, and I specialize in energy efficiency. So when I think about the city of the future, I think about energy in the built environment, and that's how I come to answering your initial question there, Jeremy. Germany's interesting for international businesses in this respect too. The country has 22 million buildings. That's the largest building stock in Europe. And the good news is that Germany aims to make this building stock climate neutral by 2050. The problem is that 3/4 of those buildings were built before the first energy efficiency standards were introduced in Germany in the 1970s. And those buildings will still be standing in 2050. So they will all need some modernization. And on top of that, basically 3/4 of heating systems need to be upgraded. So you can see the size of the challenge, but hopefully also the potential. We're on the cusp of faster growth. On the one hand, due to price signals, such as Germany's new CO2 pricing on heating oil and fossil gas. And on the other hand, the government is funding modernization like crazy. The new energy efficiency subsidy program has just been boosted with €6 billion. There were also approaches happening in Germany, such as neighborhood renovation projects and streamlined high-speed renovation of whole streets through the Energy Sprong initiative. And so we can see that the momentum here is really growing. And here at GTAI, at Germany Trade and Invest, we're getting a lot of interest from international businesses that are interested in Germany's cities and the built environment and in setting up here. And I think my message to any companies out there is, if you're interested, now's a great time to look at Germany, and we'd love to assist you.
We could hear 5 very good reasons here. I was watching Kate nodding with her head too. What a pleasure to see how technology and technical know-how will contribute to radically changing the construction sector. Thank you so much for your engaging interventions. Now let us delve deeper into some of the questions we've dealt with. First, I'd like to address my questions to Miss Kate Armstrong. What are the specific expected results for the Centrino project?
So the project started last year, and so we're just really at this scoping and mapping stage where we're really going into each of the pilot cities and having them really start to map and understand their local context. And for us in the project, this is the most important and crucial part, because this is when we start to see the networks building, start to understand which stakeholders are actually involved in this place and in these cities, and what are the environmental and social impacts that they're looking to actually solve through the project. So we're here in the project, and how we actually get to, let's say, solutions or achievements is yet to be seen, although it is our aim to build very specifically through actually the Fab Lab Barcelona team, as we're the scientific coordinators of the project, to build a framework that can be then passed to other cities and, as we were hearing before, be emulated in different places. So that's one definite concrete outcome we're looking for. And in each of these 9 cities we're working with, we're hoping and we really aim to invest in really understanding how these centres of innovation, and specifically what we call a Fab City Hub, can work and be catalysts inside the city. So yeah, it's really exciting because we're already seeing really different ways of working. So you're looking at, for example, down here in Barcelona, this is actually our pilot. It's the Poblano region. So we're working with Poblano Urban District and with Innova FFP, which is about vocational training, another very, very important part of the project. And we're already seeing us kind of digging into the history and digging into who are the people living in this region and what is the history that we are really confronted with. Here it's really so far about textiles, which is very interesting, the history of this area. And then that really, let's say, in comparison to what's happening in Paris, Paris is working on food. So that makes sense. It's about procurement. It's about how do you create urban spaces, food hubs, and how do you engage the existing actors in this narrative. So in terms of concrete solutions or outcomes, we're already seeing this for us is very interesting. And remember, it's 9 pilots. So this is only 2 of the 9. Yeah.
It is very interesting indeed. Yeah. I have a question also for Mr. Robert Compton. Germany is a highly resilient country and a pioneer in energy efficient construction innovations. What lessons do you think would be useful to the rest of the world?
Well, in terms of energy efficiency in construction, Germany started introducing standards way back in the 1970s and was an early starter in that respect. It was in response to the oil crisis originally. And those standards, some of them you'll know, so the Passive House standard, for example. And those standards have developed over time, and there's been a lot of expertise and experience that's built up in institutions around that. Also in terms of certification through perhaps the DGNB, you might have heard of. And in Germany, we've always had a mix of quite strong standards, quite high standards and requirements, but also on the funding side of things, rewarding constructors for going above and beyond. So the further you've gone beyond the sort of minimum efficiency standards, the higher the level of funding that's been available. So it's kind of a carrot and a stick that's happened over time, and that's kind of been the German approach to energy efficiency in buildings to date.
And I have a question for you, Kate. You use industrial historic sites from the past to proactively project the future. Can you explain to us how this is done?
Yeah, so the project is based around kind of understanding what this shift from the industrial paradigm to what is coming next really looks like, and what is that transition mode? How do we actually create space for that in our city, and how do we do that without, the buzzword gentrification, no? How do we actually do that really well, encouraging our cities to be true to themselves and also the ecological challenges I mentioned? So one way we do this is through the idea of circularity. So circularity is not just something that is about materials, which of course this is an important part, but it's also about understanding complex systems and understanding what is involved in this multi-scale and multi-sectorial approach to innovation and change. And these historic sites really provide some great research potential. They are really interesting sites that can give us so much inputs into understanding what those changes and what that transition can be.
Indeed. And to achieve true proximity consumption, would it be necessary to have a Fab Lab in each city?
It's a good question. So I mentioned Fab Labs before. I mentioned maker spaces, food labs, Fab City hubs, all these kinds of innovative spaces that kind of bring together innovation with citizens and culture and creativity. Look, what is important about these spaces is that they are incubators and incubators for change. So what we look for when we think about systemic transition is who is involved in that, and how can we really ensure that it's not just on a governmental level and it's not just in schools, but how does it actually flow through our communities and become part of the way that we live and work. And these spaces are really catalysts of that. So whilst a Fab Lab is absolutely about digital fabrication, machining, about creation, it's also about a cultural and a cultural space. It's really also about learning. It's about knowledge transfer, and it's about open innovation and training of people through the city. So yeah, a Fab Lab is always a wonderful thing to have in a city, but it really needs to be embedded into a community.
Okay, noted. I have a question for Mr. Robert Compton too. Can you share any prominent example in German industries regarding sustainable mobility and infrastructure with possible replicability in other cities around the world?
It's a good question, Jamie. Thank you. I think in terms of big industry in Germany, if you think about the strengths of big industry in Germany, you talk about the automobile industry, obviously, and with the move towards e-mobility now really taking hold. As one example there that springs to mind straight away is obviously Tesla with the new gigafactory that's being built just outside Berlin in the state of Brandenburg here. But there's also, of course, homegrown players like Volkswagen with the ID range and the associated battery projects and things like that. So if you ask me about sustainable mobility, and from an industrial point of view, those are two examples that spring to mind. But at the same time, I don't think anyone's under the illusion that replacing internal combustion with e-mobility is the entire solution. It's not enough to just replace cars, especially within the urban environment. And I think one example there is actually an example that came up during the pandemic that's been copied in other cities is the pop-up cycle infrastructure that started in Berlin and was then sort of codified and was then copied by other cities around the world. So sort of fast-tracking infrastructure, something that would normally have taken quite a long time to develop, happening really rapidly. It never wastes a good crisis. And also projects such as combined mobility hubs with multimodality, micro-mobility, so car sharing, e-bikes, stand-up scooters, but also combined ticketing with public transport. And one example, again, is from Berlin. Yelby is the app that's used here for multimodality. And that's actually provided by a Lithuanian company called Trafi, came in and developed that out there. And there are other examples of that, Polygo in Stuttgart, for example.
I wonder why Berlin is one of my favorite cities. This has been truly a beneficial session, and we feel very privileged to have had the intervention of people who are so wholeheartedly dedicated to changing the environmental impact of buildings and neighborhoods. But to wrap up this expert panel, I would like to share the key questions we've received from our audience. And I know that they have been sending questions, and they are telling me the questions right now. First question, what do the speakers believe to be the greatest challenge that cities need to solve in the next 5 years, and how to get started? You can start.
Okay. Yeah, it's a big question. Huh?
I know.
Look, I think in our work in Fab Lab Barcelona, one of our biggest focuses right now is on circularity, as I talked about before. But I think what it is for me is one step further, and it's something I also mentioned earlier, which is about education. I think what is so important is that, you know, depending on which environmental challenge that you choose, what we need to do is embed these issues and embed the knowledge that we're generating at the research level into our cities with our citizens on the ground level. So I think that whatever the challenge is, whichever one we can pick, I think what is important is about this filter down effect to really engage citizens and people and communities with the knowledge that is necessary. So train the trainer, knowledge transfer, vocational training I mentioned before. These for me are really about how we can get started in overcoming all issues, being resilient citizens, navigating complexity, navigating uncertainty, and we've just lived this in the last pandemic. So I think, education for me, and I don't know exactly how that answers the question, but this is really important for us. So,
what can you add to this, Robert?
I think Kate hit the nail on the head there. Absolutely, education and cultural change are perhaps the biggest challenges. If I put my business hat on, then you can also look at it from that side. And I mean, cities are facing an absolutely huge challenge on so many fronts. And there has to be a lot of investment that happens in infrastructure. That's expensive, that's difficult in metros like railway, energy, heating, cooling networks. But there's also a lot that has to happen on the national level as well, and even on the EU level, changing those economic drivers. For example, the CO2 pricing that I mentioned before, that reduces amortization times on climate-friendly options. But it's a lot more about culture and policy. That's really the biggest challenge, and that can mean simply making good planning decisions. It can be setting political priorities, but that means investment in people.
You're both in the same page. I see that. We have a second question from our audience, because they are sending questions right now. And it is, can the speakers share good practice examples of the projects and work they are working on that can be replicable in other cities or other places? Kate.
This is a core part of what we do. So most of the kind of knowledge that we develop in Fab Lab Barcelona and also in the projects that we do is done so to be able to be replicable. So, we're building frameworks, methodologies, different kinds of work that can not just help one place, but actually be kind of examples or practice for others. So we can think of other projects that we're currently doing. So we have a project, another European Horizon 2020 project called Reflow. This project is around circularity in cities, and we've been developing, for example, an academy and other tools that can be taken up by cities and actually start to be implemented locally in other places. And I think that this is a huge part of, again, it's a kind of education, it's a kind of knowledge sharing that really needs to be embedded into the way that we're practicing. Yeah.
We've heard before, Robert, all the projects in Germany, especially in Berlin. I don't know if you had anything more to add to this.
Sure. I mean, in terms of the work that the agency does, Germany Trade and Invest, we're supporting international companies that are setting up a presence in Germany, and that's where we come in with our expertise to help them. So I can't go into too many specifics about the companies we're assisting, but what I can say is that a lot of them are getting involved or looking at very closely at the projects that are happening around the country. And as I mentioned, the Interior Ministry has put 1 billion euros in funding into smart city initiatives around the country. There are a lot of those happening in larger cities, smaller cities, and a lot of those are based on the idea of replicability. So the idea is that they take the best practice examples, the things that work best, and then multiply that out to other cities throughout the country, and obviously where it works well internationally as well.
We have a third question from our audience, and this one is really, really interesting, because they say, how do Kate and Robert think that their teams could collaborate in the shared purpose of improving cities, taking into account their different sectors and work? So how can you work together?
I think I've mentioned it before that we work in very diverse and in kind of, multi-sectorial teams. But I mean, it's also kind of a difficult question for us because we're based here in Fab Lab Barcelona. Yeah. We're kind of 32 people and we're working there inside the Advanced Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia, larger team. We're then also connected to multiple European projects across Europe and then also connected to global networks. So for us, it's kind of, which team do you want to work with? So I think number one is that we would need to kind of understand how we can facilitate that kind of work. But, I think it's definitely, again, it's about absolutely these kinds of unexpected relationships and unexpected ways of working that we are kind of fostering in the projects that we do, bringing together different kinds of stakeholders. That's kind of what our work is all about. So I think that it would be a pleasure to work together anytime, Robert, anytime you want to work on any of we're very good at smart cities, for example, if you're interested. I think that would be a fantastic collaboration. And actually, I was thinking the Refo project that I mentioned earlier, we actually have a pilot in Berlin.
Wow.
And we have another project called Food Shift, which is another Horizon 2020 project, which also has a pilot in Berlin. So we're already there, Robert. We can definitely collaborate.
Robert, I saw you putting your thumbs up.
Of course. That's fantastic to hear that there are projects going on in Berlin and obviously around the country as well. And in my work and in my team's work, we're out and about with these companies, talking with different institutions as well, trying to find the right fit for a company, find the right location for them in Germany. Where's their entry point? Where are there actors that they can work with? Which level of, do they need to be talking with local government? Does it need to be bigger? Does it need to be private partners? And so we all move in this sort of smart city world. I mean, we cover all industries, but in particular with energy efficiency in buildings, there's a lot of contact points with a lot of people, and so we kind of all work together in the bubble at the same time. And those points where you meet the citizens and the public, that's such invaluable work as well. And obviously, GTA, I would be happy to work with Kate whenever, if there's a suitable point at any time.
Fully noted. And I have a fourth question from our audience. As both speakers work on relevant projects at different scales, obviously, how do they think that can we keep improving cities locally at the same time as advancing legislation on a national level? Kate?
Yeah. Look, I think that the work that we're doing, again, top down, bottom up, really demonstrating how these ways of working can make change in cities for citizens, for businesses, for local policymakers. I think that the demonstration and actually actively participating in a city to show outcomes and solutions, I think that this is paramount to be able to lobby to the national government and lobby at a more advanced level. This is also a big part of what we do. As I said, we work on European level, and we have really great relationships with our European counterparts to be able to really push forward these ideas that we think are very important, and especially in the smart city agenda, citizens are key to that, and people and the way that cities work holistically from a social and cultural perspective and an ecological perspective, this is key. And so, I think that demonstrating that through projects like Centrino at this pilot level that can really prototype what is possible, and then taking that through the correct avenues to show progress.
I'm sorry, Robert, because I'm always starting with Kate. So I promise the next question I'll start with you, because the audience keeps sending questions. So what do you think about this?
In terms of the private sector, I think it says local government needs to create platforms to enter into dialogue with the companies. So a lot of the young companies I see sort of sometimes develop solutions that as they see fit, and they don't quite match the city's needs or even at all, and at the same time the cities haven't always communicated what their needs or even better communicate what their problems are, and so there's that communication there, and then there's procurement, which Kate mentioned at the start as well, and it's kind of a whole topic for itself, but the EU's innovation procurement seems to make a lot of sense to me. So defining the problem and not the solution, and then seeing what comes back, ideas that you didn't even think of.
It makes perfect sense. So I promised you, and I will do it. Robert, for you, this question the audience is sending: how can cities engage citizens?
That's really a question that I would have posed to Kate. That's the real core of her work.
I'm sorry.
No, it's the core of her work, and it's our job there to assist businesses that are looking to set up in Germany. And citizens' engagement is not something that we're totally involved with directly, but as I mentioned again, there are these 80, 90 projects that are funded at the moment that are happening throughout the country, in large cities and small cities. And Germany is such a diverse country, and so many diverse cities, so many situations. They all have specific needs, and they're all engaging with their citizens. It's almost always part of the funding, part of the projects these pilot projects that are being set up is the citizen engagement. And so this is happening throughout the country. But I think when it comes down to the actual content of that citizen engagement, and I've been involved privately in part of that citizens engagement, but not through my work. So I think Kate's in a better position to talk on that point.
Okay, so Kate.
I'd love to. Yeah. Look, again, it's what we do. I work in the communication team, so I lead the design and communications at the lab. And for me, this is about developing a narrative that is inclusive to everyone. So how can we really explain and generously explore through different ways of narrative building what it is that we do and how others can be involved. And for us, this engagement is really important. So it's not about kind of speculating on what might be the case. It's actually about going out there and making personal connections and meeting people. And you can do this through many different ways. We've done this, for example, through co-design processes. We very recently did another pilot project here in the Barrio, which is called Remix El Barrio, which was about the circulation of refuse from local businesses and how we can use design and co-design processes to turn that into usable products. So this is a fantastic example of using the skills of people, great narrative building, really showing that there's a need and that there's a potential for real change that is engaged and embodied by our citizens. And then, this is enough really to engage people, because it's about creating value for them and creating value for the project that you're looking to work on. So I think for us, this is something we get a lot of joy out of, and it's something that is always evolving. So we're always looking at how we can push this and understand it, as I said, not just here, but in other pilot cities, and really create some methodologies to help others to do this too.
it's evolving, but is it difficult? Do you feel like something is changing in the mentality of citizens?
I think that citizens are becoming much more aware of the, for example, smart city agenda, for example, a lot of data and these kinds of topics. And through this comes a lot of questions. One of the things we do is we look to kind of build their capacity in data literacy, understanding what is inside your products, how does it work, what is the technology. We actually look to open up the processes and in this way, build the capacity of people to actually have autonomy and participate because they want to and not because they're forced to or there's another agenda at play. So, yeah, I think it's always difficult because everybody has their own interests, but in the end, we're all citizens of the same city. So, yeah.
Thank you again for your participation. We take note of the other questions and we'll try to address them in upcoming sessions to come from Tomorrow.City. It's time to say goodbye to our speakers, but after hearing their views and the remarkable work they are accomplishing, I am sure that the future that awaits our cities is certainly a sustainable and exciting one. Now, for the last side event of the day, we have the immense pleasure of having the presence of Bright Cities Solutions made in South America to challenge